started recording, everyone. If you don't want to be on screen, obviously don't put your cameras on. It'll just be me and Sean.
Do I get that choice? I don't think I get that choice, do I? No.
No, you don't. You don't. Can everyone see the kind of first page of the slide deck?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Looks good.
Cool. And just while we're waiting for more people to join, is there anything in particular that you, obviously I've given a bit of a description of kind of what's going to be covered, but is there anything additional that you might want us to tack on at the end?
Can't think of anything at the moment, but maybe have some questions at the end.
Good. And we'll obviously make the recording available for everyone that attends as well. So if there's anything that you want to go back and watch, what we try and do is just kind of not just present to you. We want to try and do something that's of a bit more value. So that's why it's not just me, it's Sean, and that's where you'll get 100% of your value. It's from Sean.
Pressure's on.
Yeah, and like Anita said there as well, if there's any questions going through and stuff, you can either drop them into the chat, or to be honest, you can just butt in. We won't be offended. Give it one more minute. I think we just crack on. Is everyone happy for us to just go for it?
Let's do it.
Yeah.
Spot on. Well, thank you very much for joining us today. So this is our latest sprint. For the benefit of the people kind of watching on the recording, my name's Martin Carrick. I'm an account director here at Firebrand. And I'm joined today by Sean Rafter, who is our head of curriculum for all of our data programs. Hi, Karen, you all right?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, not bad. Just to let you know, we're recording the session, so we won't be offended if you knock your camera off, or you can leave it on. That's entirely up to you.
Thank you.
Stuff. So we're just kind of starting. I've just introduced myself, and Sean, who's joining me and will be delivering the bulk of the session, is our head of curriculum for all of our data programs and our business analysis level 4 as well. But certainly thank you very much for joining. So in terms of kind of, I guess rather than an agenda slide, I'll just kind of talk through what we're doing today and kind of why we're doing it. And the first thing to say is that in the data space within tech and digital apprenticeships, the data space is probably the best served and best developed in terms of progression for apprentices and organizations. So on an individual basis, sort of for the apprentice, there's the opportunity to move up through the levels from kind of 3 all the way up to 7. And for organizations, there's the opportunity to fill skills gaps kind of immediately at various levels in data roles. What we want to talk about today is kind of where each level fits within an organization. And what can individuals who undertake one of these programs end up being actually able to do? So kind of what kind of tangible skills do they learn? And therefore, what skills are you bringing into your organization? We'll kind of cover that as well. And what if you had multiple apprentices on each program at one time? Could they work together, and what would each person bring that's a bit different based on the content of kind of what they're learning? And Sean's come up with an example project in relation to data, which will be able to demonstrate kind of where the different programs knit together in that particular project. So we're talking about someone on the level 3 data technician working with someone on the level 4 data analyst, working with someone on the level 6 data scientist, and working with someone on the level 7 AI. Kind of what would they all contribute, which I think is a really exciting and cool idea. And then why we're doing it, kind of similar to what we did in our last sprint, if anyone attended that. On the last sprint, Sean gave away some kind of data tricks in Excel. Really, we want to be able to help, and in this instance, we want to help in terms of the internal conversations that you typically go away and have if you're in that kind of apprenticeship lead role, where you might have a bit of interest in data programs, but you're not really sure kind of where they fit. And it's really interesting that the data apprenticeships are at the minute the most popular nationally, and there's no signs of that kind of slowing down, even ahead of the more traditional, traditional IT apprenticeships and software development and cyber. So hopefully it's a session that will bring you some benefit in that regard. If anyone's viewing the video that is kind of working within a data team or leading a data team or is a head of function or even is, potentially looking at actually being an apprentice, then hopefully there's some stuff in what we're going to go through that'll benefit them as well. And finally, questions and comments. I think I hold them to the end. The reason I've put that is there was quite a high profile example of this last week on a call that me and Sean were on. If you do the little hand raisey thing, I do tend to miss it. So if you can hold questions and stuff till the end, that'd be great. But having said that, if you want to butt in at any point on me or Sean, we definitely won't be offended. But I might miss the little hand raisey thing. So just to kind of quickly cover, up on the screen, you can see our portfolio of apprenticeship programs, and the easiest way to describe this is that we deliver the full suite of level 3 and level 4 within the digital route of apprenticeships. In terms of kind of content of those programs and any of our programs, anyone within the Firebrand apprenticeship team is available to discuss them further. So if there's any additional information that you want, there's an email address at the top, apprenticeship@firebrandtraining.co.uk, and someone will come back to you. Additionally, you can put any questions and comments in the chat. But if I could just draw your attention to the red boxes, that's what we're going to look at today. So you've got the level 3 data technician, the level 4 data analyst, and the level 6 data scientist, and the level 7 AI. So Firebrand's version of the levels 6 and 7 will be launching soon, and that's in addition to, and I couldn't fit these on the slide, but the level 6 digital and technology solutions professional, the level 7 digital and technology solutions specialist, and the level 6 cyber security. So for all of our level 6s and level 7, we'll be going live soon, which is really exciting. But in terms of kind of what we currently deliver right now, what we're going to talk about today, it's the level 3 data technician and the level 4 data analyst. And like I said, if there's anyone that wants to discuss anything further or ask any questions, either use the chat function or the email address at the top, which I think is on the last slide as well. But that's apprenticeship@firebrandtraining.co.uk. So with that said, Sean, I will hand over to you. I'll stop sharing.
Thank you very much, Martin. So I think Martin's kind of introduced me already, but just for completeness, my name is Sean Rafter. I am the head of curriculum for data and business analytics. I've been with Firebrand just over 3.5 years. And prior to that, 20 years worth of analytics and business analysis experience in the public and private sector. So Martin's right. What we want to do today is kind of bring the pathway around data from level 3 to level 7 to life a little bit. Now, that is not necessarily a hugely easy thing to do, particularly given that a lot of organizations are kind of starting off on their pathway in terms of implementing data science and machine learning, et cetera, et cetera. Obviously, we work with a lot of different clients across a lot of different sectors. So I've chosen an autonomous vehicle kind of case study and example, and we're going to be looking at how an analytical function might improve the battery life of electric vehicles, because I think, well, government legislation, et cetera, we're going to be feeling the pain or not the pain of ranges and charging times of electric vehicles kind of within the next 5 to 10 years. I think I'm right in saying within the next 5 years, no new cars will allow to be built that are sold in Britain that are either petrol or diesel. So we will have a huge issue in terms of how batteries are going to support our kind of social mobility moving forward. But before we get to that, Martin's kind of shown you our level 3 and our level 4 provision, and they're the provisions that we have built as it stands today. We haven't yet got to the stage where we are able to show you and share with you a journey in terms of our level 6 and level 7 provisions, but that is not too far away, and we will be ready for launch early next year. So I'm going to take you through the level 3 and level 4 programs that kind of Firebrand deliver, and then we'll go into the case study around electric vehicles and batteries, and hopefully it will resonate at some stage along that kind of journey. So in terms of level 3 data technician, a little bit of a new entrant to the market in terms of the standards. The standard's been around for just over 1.5 years now. And I think it reflects something that analytically a lot of organizations have been trying to kind of overcome the challenge of really experienced, highly paid, highly skilled data analysts. And do you want those data analysts extracting and cleaning huge volumes of data, not necessarily using those skills that they've built up over the long term that they've had kind of formal training in? So how do we alleviate some of the more manual processing of data to allow our data analysts to really focus and hone in on that descriptive and prescriptive analytics piece? And I think that's where the kind of data technician comes in. Another angle you could look at the data technician is maybe someone that's in more of a management position, maybe a middle management position where data is being used extensively to kind of drive decisions and outcomes, et cetera, et cetera. Potentially there's the ability for maybe a middle manager to look at the level 3 data technician program as well, because it will give them those kind of residual and foundational skills so they can confidently use data in their management position moving forward, knowing they've got that kind of that foundational knowledge in behind it. But in terms of Firebrand's level 3 data technician program, we run that over 16 months. And for those that are kind of familiar with apprenticeships, 13 months of going on courses, developing portfolios of evidence, and the final 3 months of the endpoint assessment process, where we're effectively handed off to an independent assessment organisation, a little bit like learning to drive. Firebrand will teach you to drive, but we won't give you a driving licence. We'll teach you to be a data technician, but we won't make a competency judgment formally about whether you're able to be a data technician within industry. So you'll kind of see this slide kind of ubiquitously throughout other Firebrand kind of sprints and deliveries, et cetera, et cetera. And this is kind of our journey slide. So in terms of the data technician journey, we have 4 courses. First course, roughly around month 2, data technician fundamentals. How can data be used in business? What are some of those roles and responsibilities? Excel is a key facet to most analytical teams globally. It's a specific tool. It has specific positives and specific negatives in terms of where it's used. The reality is kind of 80 to 90% of analytical tasks are still being performed using Excel. So no shame to have Excel as one of the fundamental pieces of software through our data technician program. And the reality of our level 4 is you could do the entirety of level 4 using Excel as well. The key thing that we're looking to do in Firebrand is provide people a toolbox and that understanding to know which tool fits the right situation. So we'll talk about Excel extensively. We'll talk about how you would scan and mine data in Excel, some of those fundamentals of visualizations. In the second course, data technician concepts, roughly around month 4, we'll start to get a little bit more specific. What are the common types and formats of data that someone using data is going to become familiar with? What are some of those data security considerations that we need to have? GDPR, the Data Protection Act. What's the difference between structured and unstructured data? And certainly a lot of the data that's been recorded in the last 10 and 15 years, predominantly unstructured. We're still recording a lot of structured data, but a lot more unstructured data is coming into being now. And the challenge is how do we extract insight and return of investment from unstructured data? Data quality issues are obviously really important. The more accurate the data, generally the better the analysis can be. So we need to have mechanisms for identifying and overcoming those data quality issues. Stakeholder management is obviously really key as well, particularly when engaging with that stakeholder right at the beginning, gathering that kind of analytical requirement and seeing that through to fruition. The third course is really important in any data role, be it at 3 or level 7. So really have that fundamental understanding about where does our data live? Where does it reside? Where is it stored? Where is it moved to? How is it stored? Is there a difference between storing structured and unstructured data? And that's where our storing, extracting and using data course comes in. So we'll look at those database fundamentals, the importance of relational databases, non-relational databases, modern data warehouses, dashboardings, the data architecture that provides our ability to performance manage our businesses through data. And then in our final course for level 3 data technician, a very specific and probably for me the best Excel course that is out there on the market at the moment. It's called Data Analysis and Visualization with Excel, snappily acronized to Dave. I don't know whether that was deliberate or not. And there you will expect to see some of those analytical fundamentals within Excel. Excel is an absolute analytical workhorse. If I had to manipulate 50 million records of data and produce some advanced analytics, I wouldn't use Excel, but most analytical tasks aren't involving 50 million records of data, which is why it's still so fundamentally important for kind of analytics moving forward. Clearly, it can analyze and visualize data. You can create dashboards in Excel. It might not be the best piece of software to do it, but you can do it in there. You can also do kind of intermediate statistical analysis as well. So there are additional add-ins that come in with Excel that allow you to perform linear regression and t-tests and different kind of statistical tests to kind of bolster some of your analytics as well. And there are big myths around Excel in terms of the volume of information it can manipulate and handle. It can display with you quite easily 1 million records, but actually it can handle kind of 20-25 million records if you're streaming data into a data model using Power Query and Power Pivot. So there's a lot of myth busting that happens with Excel in particular, and it still is one of the most longest serving bits of software that's probably had the most amount of money invested in it over the length of time that it's kind of been around, and it must have been around for at least 30 years now. So that's our level 3 data technician provision. Exactly the same thing in terms of our level 4 provision. 4 courses, exactly the same length of kind of journey, 16 months in total, 13 months of practical learning and developing portfolios and coming on courses. But clearly the courses differentiate in terms of the different levels. So at a level 4 data analyst, you'd be expecting more challenging aspects to be covered off, more return on investment in terms of some of the value that they produce as well. So I'll try and whip through this as quickly as possible because we are not here all day. But the first course, Introduction to DA. Actually, a DA might be mentoring a level 3 apprentice, might aspire to a level 6 apprentice or a level 7 apprenticeship. So actually a really good understanding in terms of the apprenticeship environment around data democratization, that really important facet of our organizations want more of us to make data-led decisions. So what kind of systems, how do we extract that data? How do we use it effectively? A large proportion of analytical action and tasking is supporting that wider aspiration around data democratization. We'll look at the life cycles of analysis. We'll dive much deeper into the data quality issues at level 4. We'll start to really drive into insight and recommendations. How can we generate and drive change through data at a level 4 analytics level? We'll introduce machine learning and AI as well to really complex and challenging subjects, which are supported by our level 6 and level 7 apprenticeships, but they are very, very challenging and complex subjects underpinned by very complicated maths as well. So we need to involve and introduce those concepts in a very supportive and nurturing fashion. The level 4 course is really practically focused in nature. So our second course is around data creativity, how we extract data, how we visualize data, how we link some of the trends in data to real life influences. A lot of trends in data are driven by real life influences. And the first stage is to understand what they are, and then we can look to mitigate or leverage kind of as required. We'll look at advanced visualization as well. So how do humans perceive information from a psychological point of view? And we can use psychologists and their work and their understanding to kind of guide us in terms of how humans perceive information so we can better curate our visuals. We'll introduce some of those more advanced tools such as R and Python. And then in the third course, we'll build on those R and Python skills. So we'll start to look at what we coin as advanced analytics. And for those in the know, it's clustering, classification, and regression. And for those not in the know, it's starting to use more predictive algorithmic models to help us prescribe different courses of action for our businesses. We'll look at time series analysis as well, and how we can use mathematical forecasting models to predict trends into the future. We'll look at unstructured data, and we'll major in on that in terms of natural language processing. So we'll drive the apprentices and we'll give them a big data set of reviews, and we'll drive those apprentices to extract all the key words and information from those used customer reviews and derive some sentiment analysis from it as well. In the third and final course, you can be the most technically adept analyst in the world. You can be the best at SQL, the best at R, the best at Python. You could be developing neural networks, but if you're unable to communicate how they work and how they can benefit your business, you can have a limited impact in terms of your analytical capability. So that fourth and final course is really about cementing those communication skills. So a 4-day course is split into 2 days worth of communication theory, 2 days worth of manipulating and mining a data set and developing a presentation off the back of it, which is then presented to peers as well. So that's our kind of level 3 and level 4 programs. I'm often I often consider how all of those kind of different levels and aspects of data analytics kind of feed into a coherent kind of structure. And I think that's one of the things that organizations are really struggling to realize at the moment. And there are lots of kind of bits of best practice, be it locally, be it centrally within businesses, but it really needs that kind of data strategy and a framework to be kind of pulled around it. And that's how you'll get the best out of the level 3 to level 7 apprenticeships. And in addition, having this really not necessarily tight framework, but a framework to rely on, that will allow you to move into the level 6 data science space and the level 7 AI space. And I think it's fair to say, and my own personal opinion is that you really ought not to be even thinking about level 6 and level 7 in terms of data until you have that really robust level 3 and level 4 capability within your organization. So I suppose the distillation of that is you're going to find it virtually impossible to implement artificial intelligence unless you have a really robust analytical structure, framework, resourcing in place. Once you have that in place, you'll be much more able to realize some of the benefits that AI and machine learning will deliver, and they will deliver colossal levels of benefits, larger than the Industrial Revolution. But if you don't have that strong analytical function, you're going to find that level 6 and level 7 piece incredibly difficult to realize. And the reality is, if your competitors have that decent analytical structure, they're going to accelerate ahead of you when they move into data science and artificial intelligence. So this is just a bit of a potential model about how these different kind of levels stitch together. So in terms of the level 3 piece, I used to know a level 3 data technician when I saw this standard come out. Immediately I thought data researcher. When I was an analyst in industry, I was paired with a researcher, and the idea was that researcher did a large amount of the manual legwork for me, and then I was just allowed just to focus my brain on actually the bigger questions. What does my customer want to get? How does this factor into strategic objectives within my organization? So I was buddied up with effectively a junior analyst and a researcher to provide me that clean information. And that was actually quite difficult operationally to manage because this researcher would often get pulled off into different kind of tasking. So this is where I see the data technician predominantly sitting in terms of this model. So very much that kind of research stage, so collating data, cleaning data, maybe suggesting little analytical pathways that the analyst could follow. I've had a look at this data, I've extracted, I've cleaned it. I think we could do some time series forecasting with it. So almost suggesting to that analyst at a level 4 some of the routes that individual might want to take, and that would actually facilitate the move from level 3 to level 4 in terms of career progression. So you could hear them called a data technician, a data researcher, a junior data analyst. There is no standardized way to kind of define data roles in industry as it stands, so that they'll be called all manner of different things. So that's kind of predominantly where I see this level 3 data technician sitting, extracting, collating, cleansing data, facilitating slightly more advanced analysis at a different level. And that's where the analysis kind of stage comes in. So you might see roles such as data analyst, management information analyst, business intelligence analyst, performance analyst. They're really, again, no standardization in terms of the roles. And that's where the analyst would be looking to describe what that data is telling them and prescribe courses of action. So we call it descriptive and prescriptive analytics. Descriptive, predominantly looking in the past, prescriptive, prescribing courses of actions. At the next level, you might see a level 6 data scientist, so they'll be involved in modeling, using advanced analytical techniques to drive predictive modeling and predicting courses of action and maybe action to be taken into the future. It's predominantly a predictive role. It requires huge amounts of cleansed data and potentially huge amounts of raw data as well, because sometimes the cleansing that's happened to that data isn't fit for purpose what the data scientist needs to do. And that's where the line between those two roles is, because if the data science requires a huge amount of cleansed data, the researcher or the data technician is producing that data, so there may well be a bit of a supportive function as well. That won't necessarily get you operational predictive modeling into your business. That's where you need a data engineer, someone that can devise the pipelines of data, make sure the data feeds into the correct models at the correct times and outputs into the correct places. So you need someone that can productionize that data model. And then on top of that, you need someone that's strategy setting. And that's where the level 7 AI specialist will come in. So that person's predominant role is to look out into the market, not necessarily within the market, but look out externally to see what's the latest innovations around artificial intelligence. How can they be realized in terms of the sector that we work in? How can they be applied? What kind of governance do we need, etc., etc., etc. So that level 7 role is quite a specialist role in terms of helping develop an AI strategy, helping implement AI into businesses moving forward. I just thinking about that now, I would imagine that maybe 5, 6, 7 years into the future, there'll be a revision of the AI specialist standard, and it might be less strategy setting. It might be more operationalizing AI rather than suggesting what types of AI can be implemented. In terms of that kind of level 6 to level, or level 3 to level 6 and 7 flow, you can describe it in lots of different ways, but perhaps one of the easiest ways to describe it is the ability to predict. So at level 3, relatively rudimentary predictions. At level 4, predictions using mathematical models. At level 6 and level 7, getting into using deep learning neural networks in terms of making predictions. So really getting up in terms of the complexity around predictions. And now we come on to the case study bit. So Martin's challenge to me was, well, how can we kind of evidence that a specific area of business can get value from that level 3 to level 7 piece, which was perhaps one of the most difficult questions I've been asked in 3.5 years with Firebrand, because that's not necessarily an easy thing to do, particularly with the different clients we've got across financial services, across insurance, across Formula One racing. It's really difficult to come up with a case study that kind of resonates with everybody. So I kind of had to step back a little bit and think of something that's probably going to impact most of our lives moving forward. And it will more than likely be electronic vehicles, as long as you're able to drive. But maybe with full self-driving, you might not even need a driving license. But I bet you that's a few years off yet. So I'm just going to try and bring to life those different levels of apprenticeships using the idea of electronic vehicles, and more in particular battery life within there. And it might not be the most rock and roll subject, but I guarantee it's going to become part of our daily conversations in probably the next kind of 5 to 10 years. So let's have a look at a level 3 data technician. Well, how can they help an autonomous or an electronic vehicle manufacturer in terms of batteries and how they can improve the performance of batteries? And what I've also done in here as well is to try and alleviate some of the fear factor around data analytics, as I'm going to have a bit of a red, amber, green deal in terms of the level of coding and the level of maths that's required. So a level 3 data technician, the level of coding virtually nil. There would be really little expectation, other than maybe SQL, for a level 3 data technician to code. And when we're talking coding in terms of analytics, we're predominantly talking about R and Python and scripting to develop those advanced analytics. So at a level 3, probably not a lot of interaction with Python and R, but then that's an organizational decision to be made. I've also included a maths red, amber, green as well, because maths can be a big blocker for a lot of data analytics. And the higher you go up in terms of levels around data analytics, the more and more intense the maths becomes. And it becomes probably A level and above A level, moving between levels 4 and level 6. I think that is fair to say. So in terms of level 3 data technician, the broad purpose of the occupation is to source, find it, format, make it look nice, and present data securely in a relevant way for analysis, not for decision making. I think that's a critical point there. So the way that the apprenticeships kind of view that data technician is very much supporting that analyst. Whether that works operationally in an industry is another question to be asked. I think it can work in industry. I think it needs very, very tight data management in order to make that happen, because that level 3 data technician will be removed from supporting that analyst at certain times during their career. And that kind of breaks that relationship up. So the level 3 data technician, you can expect them to extract data, you can expect it to clean it, to format it, and that will support wider analytics, because that level 4 analyst doesn't have to do those tasks, because they can be confident they've been done, so they can focus on that slightly more advanced analytics. And they might do rudimentary analytics, simple visuals, simple counts, percentages, etc., etc., etc. So trying to realize that, and how would that work in a car manufacturer looking at battery life? Well, the data technician will be extracting battery life data, potentially probably from a cloud database, They might be using SQL depending on the database and how it's created. They might be just using a user interface where they're tick boxing or dragging and dropping kind of data entities. The spectrum of data extraction really is kind of no code to kind of full code. The data technician would need to ensure that battery life data is clean and accurate for further analytics, because if it's going to be passed up the chain, the accuracy needs to be on point, because more and more impactive decisions are going to be made off the back of that data. You might expect the data technician to perform basic statistical tests, mean, medians, modes, stacking up those mean, medians and modes to other mean, medians and modes in terms of validating that data and to understand the accuracy of the data. So that data technician very much supporting the higher levels of analytics as you kind of move through. So at level 4, the broad purpose of the occupation is to ascertain how data can be used in order to answer questions and solve problems. So not supporting further analysis, answering business questions and business problems. Some of the key bits, there'll be a data analyst would understand the stakeholder requirement. They would retrieve or extract data, depending on whether they do or do not have a kind of a buddy in terms of a researcher or a data technician. They'll be creating both static and dynamic visuals. So a static visual is I create it and the data updates, the visual doesn't update. A dynamic visual is I create the visual. Every time we get new data, that visual adjusts to reflect the kind of new data points. We'd expect advanced analytics, so predictive modeling, but probably the foundation of it, linear regression, logistic regression, relatively simple time series forecasting. Statistical tests would be brought in, but at a higher level than the level 3 data technician. So you might see a t-test in there to compare the population means of 2 different populations as to whether they're statistically significant or not. But I suppose the key bit is that premise, inference, and presentation. So premises are facts, inferences are educated guesses based off those facts, and that's that presentation piece in terms of feeding that analytical insight into the business, and it's down to the business in terms of whether they decide to take action on it or not. So in terms of that electronic battery life piece, the data analyst will be doing exploratory data analytics of the battery data. So we know that we can do analysis type A, B, and C, but actually what's the art of the possible? What else can we do in terms of analytics around battery data? So they might be looking at some of the relationships there. There will definitely be a relationship between battery life and ambient temperature. So if you're in a really cold place in the globe, you're going to get less range within your battery. Do you, as an organization, need to manage expectations? Do you need to heat the battery? Etc., all different types of problems. And conversely, in a really hot climate, you might well have improved battery performance, but I would imagine over a certain temperature, again, you'll get diminishing returns in terms of performance. So that's just one example. How can temperature affect battery life? And that could be hugely impactful if I need to stop 4 times between driving from here to London on a cold day. They would look at other appropriate analytical methods that they could apply to the data. So we can use time series forecasting to project battery life over time. So then we can start proactively saying to customers, you're going to need to have a refresh in your battery. You need to come in for, I don't know, to have some of the constituents of that battery replaced. So we can start proactively managing customers. And actually, if my car company is asking me to come in and look at my battery, then I suppose I'm less likely to run out of battery in a long journey. And they'll be applying predictive analytics where relevant in line with organizational goals as well. So maybe the car manufacturer's organizational goal is to make batteries as cheap as possible. Maybe it's to make them as environmentally as friendly as possible. They are 2 probably polar opposites in terms of organizational goals. So those predictive analytics need to be in line with those organizational goals. And the analyst needs to feed back those findings back to the optimization teams. I've just come up with that. I assume there'll be a battery optimization teams in kind of car manufacturers moving forward. There almost definitely will. So the analyst needs to physically present that information back, stand up to questioning, get a better idea about what those bots, those battery optimization teams want. What are their drivers? What are they thinking of? Because the more analyst understands their customer, the more able they are to exceed those goals. So that's level 3 and 4. At level 4, coding and maths is at amber. You would expect a higher level of maths, kind of verging on A-level maths. You would expect some coding, particularly if you're going to use R and Python. So level 4 data analyst, probably amber for coding and for maths. In terms of a level 6 data scientist, and this is where it gets a little bit complex with a level 6 data scientist and a level 7 AI specialist. Some of their responsibilities are going to be very similar, but actually the Institute for Apprenticeships, they've actually differentiated them actually quite smartly, I think. So I'll take you through those now. So in terms of level 6 data scientist, red for coding, red for maths. They're going to need A level and above level of maths. The better the level of maths, the better they are to unpick some of those predictive models they're going to be using. Those predictive models are often so complicated. One of the big blockers for data science is explaining them to managers, both middle and senior managers. They are so very complicated, and those middle and senior managers are not talking in the vernacular that data scientists use. So there's also a piece here about how the data science can help upskill some of those senior decision makers they're going to have to influence over time. But in terms of how I see the level 6 data scientist, they find information in diverse data sets to address complex problems and improve organizational processes. And it may well mean that the diverse data sets they're locating and finding are not ones that organization maintains, creates, runs, stores, etc., etc. And in the case of ambient temperature, that data scientist is going to have to be looking into the Met Office or equivalent in other organizations, unless Tesla start ubiquitously and other car manufacturers start ubiquitously calling ambient temperature all the time. I suppose there's temperature sensors in cars. It's not too much of a stretch to imagine that temperature data could be fed back into the cloud in some sense. So a data science will identify and clarify organizational challenges. And I suppose that clarification bit is really important. Really understanding what those senior managers want from data. What is the art of the possible? Where could we potentially get to? How can data science benefit us? They'll need to make sure the data is fit for purpose and freely available. That's where that linking with a data engineer can come. The data scientist to power predictive models. Basic statistics tells us them generally, and it's not a hard and fast rule, but generally the more data you have, the more confident your statistical tests can be in their outcomes. So the feeding of clean, accurate, real-time data into those models is absolutely key. So that link with the data engineers is absolutely imperative. They'll be the individual to implement those data solutions. They'll be able to identify and operationalize predictive models. So I can do a linear regression model on Firebrand data. Can I feed it into automated Firebrand processes and have decisions made off the back of it? That's markedly more complicated. And actually that requires a lot more organizational knowledge in order to implement. And they'll have impactful communication of the changes and concepts to senior stakeholders. And generally, I think over time this will change. But from my experiences, those senior stakeholders, they don't have the vernacular. They don't talk in the same language as data scientists. And I think it's incumbent on both the senior managers and the data scientists to close that gap. Those senior managers need to start talking in this language, but those data scientists need to explain their concepts in a way that lots of people can understand, not very few people can understand. So in terms of the battery piece, the data science could use some of their domain knowledge and the challenges of battery life and how data science can help. So they'll have that kind of helicopter view of not necessarily batteries within electronic vehicles, but batteries in every other device. And how are some of those similar problems overcome in different companies? They'll ensure there is accurate and a usable pipeline of battery life data to power predictive models. Their predictor model could be 100% accurate, but if no data is getting fed through to it, it's effectively useless. So they need to work a lot with that data engineer to feed that information in. They'll start to use more automated, maybe time series models, maybe with classification models implemented as well. So classification model is very simply, you show a computer a picture of a cat, and when that computer is smart enough, it'll be able to identify pictures of cats without you telling it there's a cat. They'll be, again, presenting those findings back to the wider organization, not just tactically, but how to improve and promote the use of data science organizationally. And then we have the level 7 piece. And I've had to add an additional classification. I'm a data analyst. That's what we do. And that's where that leadership bit comes in. So the AI is very much, how do we implement this in business? AI is at the stage where lots of organizations are looking outwardly to see how different organizations are doing it, not necessarily the same organization. And then they're bringing that knowledge and that insight back in and to see how they can operationalize it within their own organization. So there's a huge slice of leadership in there as well, which could actually be really good in terms of maybe you've got some of those middle to senior managers that have had their CPD stunted for a period of time. Maybe they're just building up oodles of resilience from working year after year after year. But actually, that was where that leadership bit comes in. It's a very much a leadership position for the AI specialist at level 7. It's going to have a high level of coding as well. It's perhaps not as mathematically strong as you would expect in data science. I suppose as a leadership role, you're going to be spending less hands-on time, more kind of strategy setting time. So the purpose of the occupation is to discover and devise new data-driven AI solutions. And they're not all going to come internally. Predominantly, they're going to come externally to automate and to optimize business processes to support, augment, and enhance human decision making. So it's quite generic, but it is very much that kind of strategy setting space. So translate the latest AI trends into operational language. That could be, you could work in a financial services company, but Tesla have devised some image recognition system that you can use some of the basis from that, but they are two significantly different sectors. They'll be there to initiate data science and AI projects, specifically in an agile manner. Which is more iterative development, more close conversation with customers. So to avoid you develop something over 5 years and you spent 10 million quid doing it and it isn't what I wanted. Developing stuff in an agile manner alleviates the chances of that happening. It also has got a big ethical piece to it as well, particularly with new technology where maybe legislation hasn't caught up with what AI can do. There's going to need to be a big ethical slant to it as well. So they'll need to ensure an ethical and unbiased use of AI in an organization. AI can be used unethically. It may not be consciously used unethically, but it can be used unethically. You need to have a really good understanding about how AI does its thing to work out where the ethical considerations that we need to have. At level 7, you would need to investigate, develop, and initialize AI systems. So really starting to operationalize them as well, looking outwardly for best practice, bringing that best practice in, and how can we make this work for us as a business? To tackle the most complex and challenging organizational problems, perhaps those problems that have been around for 10 and 15 years that have never really been able to be answered. There's a good chance that AI could provide the answer for that. And to be a technical SME for AI across the organization. So it might be that you've implemented AI in your analytics department, but actually your manufacturing teams need it, your logistics teams need it. So that individual will start having to have a real organizational view rather than a very tangible data specific view. And in terms of bringing that back to the kind of data battery piece, reviewing the latest trends around AI, can they be operationalized? Initiating projects on battery life, accepting that not all of those projects will necessarily provide a return on investment or be particularly successful. But at this kind of test and learn stage, everyone needs to be comfortable with that. To set up governance structures as well. So how do we check whether we're using AI ethically? Well, you need to have a structure and you need to have information fed into that structure and people making sure that a rule, a process, a governance structure has been adhered to. How can AI support making car batteries last longer, cost less, be less impactful to the environment? They're the big organizational challenges, because I want to fill up my battery as quickly as I fill up my petrol tank. I want as long a range as I've got in my petrol tank. And I do not want to have 10 million batteries put in waste disposal or landfill over the next years, storing up huge ecological disasters. We need the AI specialist also needs to ensure the right data is streamed, ideally in real time, to the right architecture to power the right prescriptions and right predictions, to make sure that that architecture that streams that data is fit for purpose and can be scalable to power AI advances in the future, to sell AI both inside and outside of the business, and you know what, to form part of industry groups to help each other out in this probably 10 to 15 year period where a lot of organizations are figuring out how we can best use AI moving forward. But particularly in the environmental and the ethical piece, I think it's really important that organizations collaborate, maybe at a level that they haven't collaborated before. I'm not sure how many minutes I have left, but I've only got a couple of slides. And so you might be thinking, well, how am I ever going to start that conversation around implementing AI within my business? Well, you know what? It's like any other change within business. The one thing that businesses do all the time is change. This is no different from any other change and will, to a certain extent, needed to be managed through like any other change within a business, a project team, a working group, the initial investigation, the requirement solicitation. You can apply a lot of business analytics processes to facilitate you implementing AI and machine learning. But here are just some, I will just whip through these very quickly, just some of the places where organizations in relatively simple areas are implementing AI, machine learning and analytics as it stands. So developing and executing marketing strategies. What do we market, to who and to when? And powering that as segmentation, segmenting our customer base into certain segments. And we target marketing to certain segments because we get more bang out of our buck for that. We can also use targeted ads, and that's what Facebook are predominantly monetizing. Chatbots as well, so alleviate the number of physical call handlers we have by hopefully answering a lot of customer questions via chatbots. In terms of sales, developing insights, forecasting sales, predicting what customers are going to do, looking at conversion opportunities and how can data support those? How can we manage our salespeople's time more effectively? One of the first advances in machine learning was from sales in the 1950s. And the challenge was, how can this salesperson that has to physically go and see these customers, how can they maneuver and see those customers in the most efficient time possible? That's one of the things that kind of kicked off some of the more modern artificial intelligence and machine learning. At HR, AI can help us shortlist. We need to be very, very careful with it. And there's a very famous example of how Amazon didn't do it very successfully, but maybe we can get it to shortlist candidates for it. Maybe we can suggest interview questions. Maybe we can alleviate some candidate questions through chat boxes. And in terms of customer experience, we can use AI to enhance relationships, to tailor recommendations, to make chatbots something that we get to the stage where I don't know whether I'm talking to a bot or a human because the responses I'm getting are the ones I need. And underpinning that, robotic process automation, the idea of getting algorithms to understand what we do as humans and some of our manual processing and getting some of those processes automated. And my final slide is there might be a huge amount of fear, both internally and externally, about the implementation of AI. And that fear is not entirely unfounded. It's probably going to have as larger impact to the employment market as the Industrial Revolution had, maybe a larger impact. And when the Industrial Revolution came around, a lot of artisan cotton makers were up in arms about the use of machines for making cotton, and they were striking and they were breaking and destroying machines and all sorts of stuff. The reality of economics meant that when industry was brought to the production of cotton, the demand for cotton shot through the roof. So in terms of the employment market around cotton, more people were required, not less people were required. And I foresee the same thing for AI. Lots and lots and lots of jobs will change. Maybe up to 50% of jobs will change. But what will come with that will be they will change to something. It won't be that 50% of the entire jobs market is made redundant. Over time, those jobs will change and they'll move to more AI focused roles. So it isn't all, it's a good thing, AI. It is not a bad thing, but we need to be part of that curve, not have that curve implemented upon us. And that's all I have for today. So I shall pause, take a breath, and see if there's any questions. I felt like time just disappeared, so I think my passion took over. That's what I'm hoping anyway.
Cheers, Sean. That was excellent. So we've got a question from Christina. How are the different program levels assessed, e.g. essays or exams? And that would be kind of, I can't speak to the level 6s and level 7s because I honestly don't know. But for the level 3 and the level 4, there are exams in there at the end of some of the courses. They're not kind of, there's no on-program assessment anymore across the digital apprenticeships, which basically means you don't have to pass exams to move through and to show progression. That progression's showed now more with kind of work-based projects. But the key thing for both the level 3 and the level 4 is the endpoint assessment, which are similar for both, I think, Sean. Is there anything, sorry, Sean, is there anything kind of different with the 6s and the 7s around the EPA?
I think the really good thing around apprenticeships is that endpoint assessment plan. So here's all the stuff you're going to need to know. Here's all the skills you need to show and all the behaviors you're going to need to show. And that's fine. People can wrap their heads around that. The other beautiful thing of the apprenticeships is here exactly is how you are going to be tested. So you can identify each one of those knowledge and skills. I'm going to be tested at this stage in this manner. And that is really cool. And the level 6 and level 7, because they're apprenticeships, they have EPA plans as well. So there's that clarity of detail. So there are no exams to be passed in 3 and 4. I think there are in 6 and I think there are in 6, but not in 7. The complexity around the assessment comes in with the university accreditation. And this is something that Firebrand are now part of the BPP group, and the BPP group have been running levels 6 and 7 apprenticeship before Firebrand have, so they've got a lot more of experience than us in that regard. They're the only private university in the UK, which they're obviously super proud with and about. And they have they have a more university focused view around assessments, whereas Firebrand come at it from a more EPA focused view. And I think when you combine those two views together, you get a really strong view around EPA with that clarity, but that kind of depth of assessment as well. Hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Cheers, Sean. And a question from Abby. The information around the programs and what it includes, is this shared with the candidates before they start, just so they have a full understanding of what they will be doing? Yes.
So not specifically that whole level 3 to level 7 bit, but in terms of the journey, that forms part of the first 3 or 4 conversations they have with their learning mentor after they're enrolled.
Yeah, and the other thing to say on that, Abby, is we do a piece around role suitability as well. So there's preparing the candidates for what they're going to go through, but even before that, we work with typically the hiring manager or the line manager along with the apprenticeship leads on actually what's the exposure. Can the apprentice's role, as you've got it planned right now, get exposure to all the different things they have to do as part of the apprenticeship? And there's tons and tons of stuff that we support with on that. Your second question around, will the slides be shared? Yes, we can do that. And provided there's no issue with the recording this time, we will also share the recording as well.
If you get it into
Thank you so
OneDrive
much.
and share it. Oh, sorry, Abby.
Sorry, I just want to say thank you.
That's fine. You're all right. Cool. Do we have any more questions at all for Sean?
I think Sophie might be mid typing something, but it might be she's been typing for a while, so it's gonna be a whopper of a question, or she's accidentally hit A.
Hi. Yeah, I stopped typing, so I realised that it was getting very long, and it would be easy just to ask the question, if that's all right, Sean.
Of course.
So, hi Martin, nice to see you. Thanks for the invite to the session today. Appreciate it. So Sean, really loved your presentation. Thank you. And there was some really interesting thought. And there was a slide specifically where you talked about I suppose the proposition of AI implementing a variety of business areas, from where you typically expect the roles to be to problems that might exist within an HR function. I suppose my question is, when I've been considering a variety of data type apprenticeships, we think about where the work is more naturally occurring. That tends to be in those kind of data science roles that exist already. Do you see that businesses are starting to have roles within an HR function that are able to use the AI apprenticeship because of the nature of the work has evolved in time, or not?
I think it's probably fair to say that I physically haven't seen that myself. Whether that's to say that that isn't occurring or not, I don't know. I'm just trying to think. You know what? I think it might depend on the kind of volume of the business you're working in. So if you're an HR manager with a kind of full complement of 15 people, you're going to really struggle to get the volume of data and the right data to power any kind of machine learning and artificial intelligence that you've self-developed. I think when you look at organizations with 60, 70, 80,000 people, then that kind of AI specialist in an HR function becomes much more realizable, I think. I think it depends where your organization is on that pathway. I think if I looked at some of my old organizations where we didn't have artificial intelligence, or if we did, it wasn't real artificial intelligence, they would see the level 7 apprenticeship as a bit of a blocker, whereas I would flip it around entirely the other way. I would, if I was in an organization which maybe didn't have a very strong data science or AI space, I would use the apprenticeship to drive us into that space. So this is what UK organizations think we need to do to kick off this AI piece. Actually, that's not a bad little framework to follow. And yeah, it might be organizationally really challenging for the first few apprentices, but once we've got that kind of cadence and rhythm going and senior stakeholder buy-in, they can see that almost tangible return on investment, that might be the kind of best way to go around it. I think we'll see AI specialists within HR functions moving forward? Yes. Yeah, I do, yeah. But it probably won't be in the beginnings of it, I don't think. I think it might be in kind of 10 and 15 years time. I hope that's not putting you off any kind of AI aspiration in the
No.
HR space, but I haven't worked at HR, so I'm only giving my personal opinion.
Yeah, no, it hasn't at all. And I work for a company that's got about 16,000 employees across the UK. So our function is sizable, but we have pockets of data discipline, I would say, in a variety of different business areas. So I think there should be. I think it would be great if an HR function had an AI specialist. But yeah, I was just interested to kind of get your thoughts as you've got lots of hugely valuable insight. So thank you for that. I appreciate it.
You know, I think it resonates back to, if you haven't got and this is where that local versus central thing kind of factors into it. But if you've got a strong analytics function in your HR function as it stands, then yeah, it's a definite goer. If you haven't, then build the level 3 and level 4 up. And then as you're going through those levels, you'll start to get a much better idea in terms of everyone's got more knowledge around analytics formally. We've got a much better way of working out, is a level 6 data scientist going to help us in HR? What kind of predictions could we possibly make? Are they going to provide us a return investment? And you can make those same decisions at level 7. Once you start to get more familiar, then you're able to ask the right questions. And can that apprenticeship provide me with this? Can it provide me with that? That might be an interesting way to go about it. So build up that kind of function. And when you've got that function kind of embedded, then you can start to, well, now we know what data science is. How can we apply it to HR? How much return on investment is that going to deliver to us? And how much in line with what our organization wants is that? That might be a different way to think about it.
Great, thank you very much.
I think Karen's got a question around a level 3 data technician working in an HR role. Definitely, Karen. We've got them. We've had them through. I think HR roles are actually, there's some really interesting stuff you can get out of HR data. And we've even had level 4 data analysts in HR teams as well. And they'll be driven to do slightly more challenging things, but could you do a regression between salary and sickness and stuff like that? So there are predictive models that you can apply in HR. You just maybe got to think a little laterally around them.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks for that. We're currently in a position where all of our processes are being reviewed. There's a lot of repetition. There needs to be more automation. So, yeah, I was just thinking on the back of the question about AI, and I was trying to take it a few steps before then, but you kind of did cover that towards the end of your response to Sophie there. But okay, that's great to know. Yeah, we've always considered these kind of apprenticeships are from a digital space, I guess, and not maybe, and that's probably because there hasn't been the appetite yet, or maybe the inquiries from an HR function, but it's really useful to me to have this as a takeaway, so thank you.
No problem.
Just on that, Karen, the data apprenticeships skew kind of, as you'd expect, the majority are in data roles specifically. But then the bigger chunk that we see are kind of marketing or HR. So it's really interesting. And that's just growing. It's worth just touching quickly for anyone's benefit, not just Sophie or Karen. Obviously, the majority of the people on this call have got my details. But we did have the apprenticeship at firebrandtraining.co.uk apprenticeship as well, which is the wider team. Any kind of follow-up questions that Sean and I can help with, just send them over. And if there's further discussions or things you want to run by us, that's totally fine. We're very happy to do that at any point. So I can see Grace is typing. Grace, we'll let you finish.
Oh no, I accidentally clicked a button. It's okay.
That's a
We've all been there.
quid in the jar. So if no one has any further questions, and if you do, you can obviously follow up, as I said, afterwards. We'd just like to say sincere thanks to everyone for joining. Sean, thanks for that. That was immense. Sorry I gave you the hardest question you've ever had. No, that's mind-blowing coming from me. We'll draw the recording to a close now if we can, Anita. But thank you very much, everyone, for attending. We really do appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Thanks
you.
very much. Bye bye.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.